The smell of turkey and cinnamon filled my parents' house. The dining room buzzed with conversation, laughter mixing with the clinking of silverware against fine china. My sister poured more wine, my father carved the turkey, and my husband sat next to me, his hand resting casually on my knee. Everything was perfect. At least it should have been. Then I saw him. He was sitting across the table, next to my cousin's husband. He relaxed, like he belonged there. A drink in his hand, a slight smirk at the corner of his mouth. My stomach twisted. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen him in months. Not since I had walked away, convincing myself it was the right thing to do. And yet, here he was. I felt my pulse quicken, heat creeping up my neck. My fingers clenched around my fork. My husband said something beside me, but I didn't hear it. My ears were ringing, my vision narrowing to the man across from me, the one person who should never have been here. I forced myself to breathe and to act normal. But my hands were trembling. My grip on the fork loosened, and it slipped from my fingers, landing on the plate with a sharp claw. My sister turned her head, giving me a questioning look. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low. I swallowed hard. "Yeah. I don't feel great." I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping against the floor. My husband's hand tightened on my knee. "Where are you going?" he asked. His voice was steady, concerned. I had no answer. I couldn't sit here. I couldn't breathe here. So, I grabbed my coat from the back of my chair and muttered, "I just need some air." I didn't wait for anyone's response. I didn't glance back. I walked out of my family's Thanksgiving dinner and into the cold November night. I slammed the car door shut, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The phone in my pocket vibrated. Again and again. I ignored it. I stared out through the windshield, my breath fogging up the glass. My heart was still racing, my mind still spinning. How had this happened? How had he ended up there? I turned the key in the ignition, needing to get away. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't sit in that driveway, couldn't risk someone coming outside to drag me back in. As I pulled onto the main road, my phone kept buzzing. My husband. My mother. My sister. I didn't answer. I just drove. The city lights blurred past me as I sped down the nearly empty streets. My breathing was shallow, my hands trembling against the wheel. I had thought I was done with all of this. Thought I had buried it. I was wrong. An hour passed before I finally pulled into a rundown motel just off the highway. The neon sign flickered, casting a sickly yellow glow over the parking lot. It was the kind of place no one would think to look for me. Perfect. I stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at my skin. My legs felt unsteady, my body running on pure adrenaline. Inside, the motel clerk barely glanced at me as I handed over a few crumpled bills. "Just for the night," I said, my voice hoarse. He nodded, sliding a key across the counter. "Room 12. End of the hall." I took it without another word. The room was exactly what I expected, dim, outdated, with the faint scent of cigarette smoke clinging to the curtains. But I didn't care. I dropped onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the panic to settle. It never did. Instead, my phone vibrated again. I turned it over. 13 missed calls. 6 messages. The last one from my husband. "Come home. We need to talk." I squeezed my eyes shut. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. I met him at a coffee shop. It was a Tuesday morning, just like any other. I was sitting at my usual table, laptop open, half listening to the hum of espresso machines and quiet chatter. Then he sat down at the table next to mine. "Excuse me," he said, tapping the counter with his index finger. "Do you mind passing me the sugar?" I glanced up, meeting his eyes for the first time. Big mistake. Because something shifted in that moment, something small but undeniable. A simple favor turned into a conversation. A conversation turned into an excuse to see each other again. And then, one night, seeing each other turned into something more. I told myself it was a mistake. that it would never happen again. But it did. Again and again. Until one day, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. I wasn't that kind of person. I wasn't someone who cheated. And yet, here I was. I had ended it months ago. I told him it was over. But tonight, sitting across from me at my family's Thanksgiving table, it was like the universe was laughing in my face. The motel room was silent except for the low hum of the heater in the corner. I sat cross-legged on the bed, staring at my phone, the glow of the screen the only light in the dim room. "You don't have to run." The message stared back at me, a quiet taunt from the man I had sworn to forget. I should have deleted it. Should have thrown my phone across the room, turned it off, done something. Instead, I read it again. And again. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, torn between replying and pretending he didn't exist. But he did exist. He had been right there, in my parents' dining room, sipping wine, laughing like he belonged. And the worst part? No one else had noticed my reaction. Only he had. I could still feel the weight of his stare, the way his eyes locked onto mine across the table. A silent challenge. How much did my husband see? How much did my family see? I clenched my jaw and tossed my phone onto the nightstand. My hands shook as I ran them through my hair. This was supposed to be over. Months ago, I had walked away. I had made the decision to stay with my husband to rebuild what I had broken. I had promised myself that it had been nothing more than a mistake, a moment of weakness, a detour in an otherwise steady life. But deep down, I had always known the truth. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. One that I had made over and over again. I leaned back against the pillows, exhaling slowly. I couldn't go home. Not yet. Not while my head was still spinning. Because once I stepped back through that door, there would be questions. And I wasn't ready for the answers. I stood outside the front door for a long time. The house was dark, except for the dim glow of the living room lamp. I knew my husband was awake. Waiting. I could leave. I could turn around, get back in my car, and drive anywhere but here. But the truth had a way of catching up to you, no matter how far you ran. I tightened my grip on the doorknob and stepped inside. The silence was suffocating. My husband was sitting on the couch, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the table in front of him. He didn't look up when I walked in. For a moment, I thought maybe he had fallen asleep. Then he spoke. "Where did you go?" I swallowed. I needed air. A humorless chuckle. That's not an answer. I stayed by the door, as if the physical distance between us could soften the conversation we were about to have. He finally looked up. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't even disappointed. They were just tired. And somehow, that was worse. "I saw the way you looked at him," he said. My heart stopped. I opened my mouth. Closed it. This was it. The moment where everything either shattered or somehow, impossibly, held together. I could lie. Tell him he was imagining things. Convince him I had been thrown off by a familiar face, nothing more. But that wasn't fair. Not to him. Not to me. Not anymore. I took shaky breath. "How much do you know?" I asked. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't know everything," he admitted. "But I know enough." The air between us was thick, heavy with words that hadn't yet been spoken. For the first time in years, I didn't know what to say. I sat across from him, hands clasped in my lap, waiting for him to speak. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Finally, he looked at me. "How long?" I hesitated. Lying would be so easy. But the truth had already started unraveling, piece by piece. "Almost a year," I said quietly. He flinched, like the words physically hit him. My stomach twisted. I had expected anger, shouting, accusations. Instead, he just sat there, nodding slowly, as if trying to process something incomprehensible. Was it just physical? His voice was hoarse. I thought about all the moments that had led to this. The lingering looks. The stolen touches. The way my heart raced in anticipation every time my phone buzzed. The way I had felt something again. No, I whispered. He inhaled sharply. Silence stretched between us, long and painful. What now? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He let out a slow breath, setting his glass down with deliberate care. I don't know. Neither did I. Because this wasn't something we could just move past. This wasn't a fight that could be fixed with apologies and promises. This was a crack in the foundation of everything. And maybe, just maybe, it was already too broken to repair.